Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're taking on, well, maybe the biggest concept there is, truth.
It really is huge.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. We use that word everywhere. It's constantly around us. We demand it from people we love, tell me the truth.
And we use it as a weapon in
Yeah,
public life, right? That's a lie.
Yeah.
Or the big one now. That's fake news.
exactly. But when you strip away all that drama, what are we really talking about? What does it actually mean for something to be true?
It's fascinating because the concept is so foundational to everything we do.
Yeah.
I mean, from building a bridge that won't collapse
Yeah.
to just having a functioning society.
Right.
But most of us are kind of running on this undefined philosophical autopilot. We have this gut feeling when we've gotten it right. We feel like we've successfully mapped a little piece of reality.
But philosophy forces us to stop and ask, okay, what validates that map? What actually qualifies a statement as true? And do we all even agree on the rules?
That's the big question.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're not just going to list a bunch of definitions. We want to give you, the listener, a kind of practical intellectual toolkit.
Yes, an operating system for truth.
Exactly. We're going to explore the major competing theories, correspondence, coherence, pragmatism, and a few others, so that the next time you hear a claim and something feels a bit slippery, you can actually identify which truth test is being used or which one is failing.
Yeah, we're moving past that simple dictionary definition and
Yeah.
getting into the real mechanics of certainty.
So where do we start? I think we have to begin with the most obvious one, the one
Ah.
that's just, common sense.
I agree.
Okay, so imagine I look out my window right now and I say, it is raining outside. I expect that statement to be true if and only if I can actually see rain falling.
Right. You check, you see the drops, you nod your head.
The statement is true because it matches the world I'm observing. Simple.
And that simple act of matching, that is an incredibly powerful and intuitive foundation. It's the starting point for centuries of philosophy, and it leads us directly into our first, and you could argue most influential, theory of truth.
So let's unpack this first one, the correspondence theory of truth. I have a feeling this theory owns the biggest piece of our mental real estate.
Oh, it absolutely does. The
Yeah.
core definition is precisely that intuitive feeling you just described. A belief or a thought or a statement is true when it successfully mirrors.
Mirrors reality.
Exactly. When it corresponds to objective facts, how things actually are out there in the world, completely independent of what you or I or anyone else thinks or feels about them.
So the theory kind of assumes there's a real world out there waiting for us to describe it correctly.
That's the fundamental assumption, yes.
Yeah.
And truth is just a successful description.
This view feels ancient. I'm guessing thinkers like Aristotle were basically correspondence theorists.
Absolutely. Aristotle has that famous line, something like, to say of what is that it is not, or of what is not that it is false. Well, to say of what is that it is and of what is not that it is not is true. I mean, that's the classic boilerplate definition of correspondence. Your statement has to align with the state of affairs in the world.
So what makes it so appealing? Why does it feel so right to most of us?
Well, its greatest strength is that it lines up perfectly with our common sense. We have this unshakable belief in a mind-independent reality.
You mean like the Earth was round long before any humans were around to think about it being round?
Precisely. We believe the laws of physics operate whether we like them or not. This framework gives a kind of stability to knowledge. It also fits perfectly with how science works.
How so?
I mean, science is fundamentally about formulating hypotheses and then testing them against the observed world. If your hypothesis, if it corresponds to the experimental data, then we say it's provisionally true.
And it also defines the rules for so much of our public life, doesn't it? The law, journalism, history.
All of it. If a journalist reports that a specific financial decision was made on a Tuesday, that report is only true if that event objectively happened on Tuesday, period.
The facts on the ground.
The facts on the ground. And even if we look at many religious or metaphysical claims, they're often framed in correspondence terms too. Adherents believe that a statement like, say, the soul is immortal, is a statement that corresponds to an objective spiritual reality, regardless of whether you can, see that reality through a telescope.
Okay, so that all makes sense. It really does feel like the bedrock of knowledge.
Yeah.
But where does the foundation start to get some cracks? If it's so intuitive, why did philosophers feel the need to invent all these other theories?
The trouble starts, really, when you try to define the mechanism of the matching, and especially when you move beyond simple physical objects. We run into what philosophers call the nature of facts problem and the matching problem.
Let's start with the nature of facts. It's one thing to verify the fact that the cup is on the table. I can see that. But what about more abstract or complicated facts?
Right. What even is a fact? The theory works beautifully for things you can point to, the tree outside my window, the temperature on a thermometer. But think about mathematical truths.
Okay.
Is 2 plus 2 equals 4 true? Because it corresponds to a physical fact.
Yeah.
If I take all the objects out of the universe, is 2 plus 2 still true?
I'd say yes.
Most people would. But what physical fact is it mirroring then? It seems to correspond to some kind of platonic or abstract reality, which isn't physical at all.
And I imagine if we move to ethics or aesthetics, the problem just gets way worse.
Oh, it compounds massively. If I say torture's wrong or that painting is beautiful, where is the objective, physical thing,
Yeah.
the structure of wrongness or beauty that my statement is supposed to be corresponding to?
You can't point to it.
You can't.
Hmm.
And this is where the theorists splinter.
Right.
Some will argue that, well, moral facts are objective, that they reside in the necessary nature of what it means to be human. Others just admit that correspondence fails here, and you have to switch to another theory for those domains.
So it struggles with anything that isn't a direct observation of a physical state.
It really does. And that leads us to the conceptual heart of the problem, what we call the matching problem itself.
Okay, what's that?
It's the question of how, exactly, does an intangible abstract thing like a thought or a linguistic statement, which is just a string of air vibrations or ink marks, how does that correspond to a physical, non-linguistic thing in the world?
This is a deep one.
It's the critical technical snag. I mean, think about it. The statement, "the cat is black," uses 3 English words in a certain order. The reality is, well, it's a furry animal of a specific color. How does the arrangement of those symbols, which are totally different from the cat itself, somehow achieve a perfect mirror of the reality?
Yeah, it's not like the word cat has fur and whiskers.
Exactly. Philosophers have been tearing their hair out for centuries, trying to define the actual mechanism of that match. Is it a structural similarity?
Yeah.
That's really difficult because language and reality operate under completely different rule sets.
So what else could it be?
Well, some say it's a causal link. But then you have to ask, what is the nature of that cause and effect between a thought and an object?
Yeah.
It leads you into these incredibly complex philosophical systems and often just circular definitions.
Let's try an analogy for our listeners. Think about a map and the territory it represents. A map is true if it corresponds to the territory, right?
Perfect analogy.
But the map is just paper and ink, while the territory is mountains and rivers. The correspondence only works because we have a standardized, agreed-upon system of projection. But who created the projection system between my brain and the world outside?
That is an excellent way to frame the difficulty.
Yeah.
When we talk about truth, we don't have a clear, agreed-upon rule book for that projection. The correspondence theory insists the map must match the territory, but it really struggles to explain the actual mechanics of the mapping process itself.
And that leads to the final piece, I think, which is the perspective problem. This brings it all back to us, the humans. Even if we say, okay, truth is a perfect correspondence, the problem is that we are fundamentally limited, subjective observers.
Mhm.
We can never actually step outside our own consciousness to check the world as it really is, versus how our mind and our culture are representing it.
We are forever stuck inside our own human perspectives. Our senses, our cultural filters, our language, every scientific observation, every journalistic report, every historical document is mediated by a conscious observer.
So we can strive for it.
We can and we absolutely must strive for correspondence. That striving is essential.
Mm-hmm.
But we can never claim infallible, godlike access to that perfect match. And that realization that the map is always filtered through the mapmaker's eyes is what forces us to look for other ways to be certain. And that brings us to the next great theory.
Okay, that sets up the transition perfectly. If we have to admit that a perfect one-to-one correspondence might be, I don't know, unattainable, or at least you can't prove it for abstract ideas,
Yep.
then we have to find truth somewhere else. So maybe the validation doesn't come from comparing one statement to the outside world, but from comparing it to everything else we already believe.
That is the necessary philosophical move you have to make when direct observation isn't enough or it's controversial. You move from that simple, isolated match to defining truth in relation to other things.
Okay, so let's talk about the coherence theory. If correspondence is the outsider checking in on reality, then coherence is kind of like the internal auditor.
That's an excellent analogy. The core definition of the coherence theory is that a belief is true if it coheres, if it fits harmoniously, logically, and consistently with a whole system or network of other beliefs you already hold to be true.
So truth is a function of the internal architecture of your knowledge.
Exactly. No statement stands alone.
This feels a lot more sophisticated than correspondence because it acknowledges that knowledge is holistic. We don't just encounter isolated facts one by one.
Precisely. Everything we learn is immediately filtered and woven into this vast, complex web of existing beliefs. Coherence theorists, who are historically linked with philosophers like Hegel, argued that truth requires this kind of systematicity. A belief all by itself is almost meaningless. Its strength comes from how much it supports and is supported by everything else.
Can you give us a really solid example of how this plays out? Especially in science, which we usually think of as being all about correspondence.
Sure. Think about a huge theory like general relativity. When Einstein first proposed it, it wasn't accepted overnight just because of one or two proofs.
Right.
It was accepted because, over time, its predictions didn't just match one observation, like the weird orbit of Mercury. The theory integrated so smoothly with the rest of established physics. It didn't contradict the conservation of energy or the known speed of light or the laws of thermodynamics. It strengthened the whole web.
So if a new scientific finding comes along and it contradicts this huge, well-established, highly coherent network of beliefs,
We generally question the new finding first, not the entire system that has worked so well for so long.
so the system itself acts as a massive quality control filter. The strength of the web validates any new strand you try to add.
That's the power of coherence. And it works in other fields too, like law. Legal systems rely heavily on precedent. A new legal ruling has to cohere with decades of established case law to be considered valid or true within that system.
And I suppose this applies to religious worldviews, too.
Definitely. If a new interpretation of a sacred text fundamentally contradicts a core, centuries-old doctrine, it's often rejected as being incoherent, and therefore it's considered false within that particular framework.
Okay, it sounds like an immensely powerful filter for internal logic, but I have to challenge this. Let's get right to the crippling limitation of this theory.
Let's do it.
If all that matters is that my system is logical and internally consistent, what's to stop me from building a beautiful, flawless, and completely false structure?
You've just hit on the central paradox. Coherence is a necessary condition for truth, but it is entirely insufficient on its own.
It tells you the building is well constructed, but not that it's built on solid ground.
Exactly. And the most vivid example of this, which is hugely relevant today, is the sophisticated conspiracy theory.
Tell us more about that. How is a conspiracy theory coherent?
Oh, they are masterpieces of internal consistency. They take all this ambiguous evidence, a weird dip in the stock market, an obscure government report, a misquoted politician, and they weave it all into a single unified story.
And the logic is tight.
The logic is incredibly tight. Event A happened because of this secret goal B, and the fact that there's no evidence for secret goal B. Well, that's just more proof of how good the shadowy organization is at covering its tracks. The system is completely closed.
So every counter-argument you throw at it just gets absorbed and recategorized as more evidence for the cover-up.
Precisely. So because the believers can explain away every single anomaly, the belief system gains this tremendous internal strength, even if its founding premise is, well, objectively baseless. It's highly coherent, but it's catastrophically false from a correspondence perspective.
It really shows that coherence on its own is a dangerous metric. It's fantastic for checking your logic, but it's terrible for checking reality.
It is. If you and I agree on some arbitrary starting point, let's say we agree the world is secretly run by giant space lizards, we could build a massive, perfectly coherent system of beliefs on that foundation. But the whole system still lacks any external validation. We need something else to anchor our web of belief to the ground.
That need for an anchor shifts us perfectly to our third major theory, pragmatism.
Right.
So if correspondence is looking for an external match and coherence is looking for internal consistency, pragmatism, which was championed by thinkers like William James and John Dewey, asks a totally different question.
It does. It asks, well, what practical difference does holding this belief make in my life?
That's the key. Pragmatism defines truth by its utility. The question moves from a static state, is X true right now, to a question of consequences. What happens if I assume X is true and then I act on that assumption?
And the definition follows from that. A belief is true if it works in practice, if it successfully helps us solve problems, organize our experience, and navigate the world, especially over the long run.
So truth isn't some static property of a statement, it's a dynamic process. It's something that's verified through action. William James had that famous phrase he called truth the cash value of an idea.
And that's exactly what he meant by it. When you go to cash a check, the truth of that check is only verified when the bank accepts it and you get the money, the practical outcome.
Yeah.
The truth isn't somehow built into the paper. It's validated by the process and by the result.
Let's expand on an earlier example. The belief that bacteria cause disease.
Okay?
From a pragmatic view, that belief is true not just because we can see bacteria under a microscope.
Which is correspondence.
Right. It's true because acting on that belief by, implementing widespread sanitation, public hygiene, developing antibiotics, consistently and demonstrably works to reduce death and increase well-being for millions of people.
It's the consistent, successful consequence that verifies the truth of the proposition. And this pragmatic test is absolutely essential in the world of, say, high-stakes public policy.
How does pragmatism apply to something like policymaking?
Well, think about economics. You have all these competing schools of thought like classical supply-side models versus more interventionist Keynesian models.
Right, and they can't both be perfectly true.
Well, neither one can perfectly correspond to objective economic facts because those facts are always changing and they're super abstract. And both systems are internally coherent, logically. But a policymaker has to choose one and act.
And the one they choose is then judged true or false based on what happens next.
Precisely. If a policy based on one of those economic models consistently leads to stability, high employment, and responsible growth, if it works to solve the problems it was meant to fix, then that model is deemed pragmatically true, at least for that time and place.
And if it leads to repeated failures?
Then it's pragmatically false, no matter how elegant or beautiful its underlying math is.
This is really compelling because it makes truth so fundamentally connected to our actual human experience, to problem solving rather than some abstract metaphysics.
Yeah.
But what about the challenge of short-term utility? Can't something seem to work for a little while but actually be deeply flawed?
That is the main critique leveled against pragmatism. And the theory's defense is that it demands the long-run test.
Long.
Yeah, a small lie might work to get you out of a traffic ticket. It has short-term utility. But if you build your entire life on a pattern of lying, the pragmatic consequence in the long run is a total collapse of trust and personal integrity. That short-term utility was a delusion. The lie was ultimately false because it failed the long-run test of what works for human flourishing.
We see that on a huge scale in history, too. Totalitarian systems sometimes work very efficiently for a generation. They build massive infrastructure. They create social control.
But their fundamental premise, that reality can be bent to the will of the state, it always leads to catastrophic, pragmatic failure eventually.
So what's the other big challenge to this theory?
The other one is what's called the problem of abstract truths. A physicist might spend 20 years proving some incredibly complex theorem about quantum entanglement.
Okay.
That proof is true, and it's important. But it might have no immediate or obvious practical use in daily life for decades, if ever. Does pragmatism end up undervaluing knowledge that's sought purely for its own sake? Critics argue that it risks reducing truth to just mere usefulness.
So if we recap, we have a correspondence anchor that's often hard to actually grab onto, a coherent system that can be a self-contained fantasy, and a pragmatic test that sometimes takes way too long to verify.
It seems that way, doesn't it?
It feels like we need all three working together.
We absolutely do. I think the most sophisticated view of truth is to use all three as a kind of combined filter. Does this claim match the world? That's correspondence. Is it internally consistent with what else I know? That's coherence. And does it help me navigate and predict reality? That's pragmatism. If a claim can pass all three tests, that's when we achieve the highest possible degree of confidence we can have.
Okay, we've built up this philosophical architecture, but now let's step outside of defining reality itself for a minute and look at how we actually use the concept of truth,
Right.
both as a piece of linguistic machinery and maybe as more of an existential guide.
This is a powerful shift because it starts to address the meta question. Why do we even have a word for true in the first place? What job is it doing for us?
All right, so deflationism. This view seems almost, nihilistic at first glance. It seems to strip all the grandeur and difficulty out of the concept. What's the core claim?
The core stance is that the word true does not name some deep, mysterious metaphysical property. It's not some special philosophical entity out there.
So what is it?
Instead, it functions primarily as a useful logical tool in our language. It's often just there to avoid repetition or to signal that you agree with something. Think of it as a kind of intellectual shorthand.
Okay, so if I say, it's true that snow is white, the deflationist or the minimalist would say, I haven't really added anything. I've just asserted snow is white, and the it's true, that part is logically redundant.
That's precisely the equivalence claim. It was popularized by thinkers like Frank Ramsey and Alfred Tarski. The claim itself is the truth bearer. The word true just signals your affirmation of it.
Why would philosophers want to do this? It feels like it's dodging the big question.
Well, the main reason they endorse this view is to get rid of what they see as the massive, messy ontological baggage of the correspondence theory. All that arguing about what a fact is and how matching actually works.
It's the ultimate simplification. But if it's logically redundant, why do we need the word at all?
Its real utility, they argue, lies in generalization.
What do you mean?
Imagine a scientist gives a 20-minute presentation with 5 key findings, 3 conclusions, and 2 new hypotheses. You don't want to stand up and repeat all 10 of those points just to affirm them.
Right. Of course not.
You simply say, everything the scientist said is true. The word true acts as this functional, indispensable tool for endorsing a whole bunch of propositions at once, very efficiently.
I see. So it's a grammatical mechanism that lets us point to a set of claims and sign off on them without getting bogged down in the spooky metaphysics of where truth with a capital T actually lives.
It's an elegant solution to a linguistic problem.
But it faces a pretty obvious intuitive challenge, doesn't it?
It does.
If truth is just a logical convenience, why do we put so much moral and social weight on telling the truth? Why do we fight so vehemently over political lies or scientific denial?
Exactly, because if the difference between a true claim and a false claim is just a linguistic label, then lying isn't a profound moral failing. It's just a failure of rhetorical convention.
It feels like it's missing something.
It really struggles to account for that profound human intuition that getting reality right matters deeply, that truth has real consequences, both pragmatic and existential. So while it cleans up the philosophy, it perhaps misses the gravity of the human experience of veracity.
Okay, let's pivot now to the domain where truth is arguably weighted the most heavily in religious and spiritual traditions. Here, the search for truth often moves entirely beyond just correct statements and logical tools.
This is the big move from the purely cognitive to the transformative. In a lot of spiritual worldviews, truth isn't merely propositional. It's not just something you know that. It's existential. It's something you know by being.
What does that mean, know by being?
It means it involves revelation, deep personal transformation, and embodiment. The quest for truth becomes inseparable from the quest for moral character.
So it's not just about what you believe, but about who you are when you believe it.
Precisely. Let's look at a couple of specific examples from history. In some Christian traditions, the figure of Jesus is identified as the truth and the way. This completely redefines truth. It's not a linguistic proposition you just recite. It's presented as a person, a path, a moral way of life that demands your fidelity and your discipleship. The truth has to be lived, not just stated.
And if we look to Eastern traditions, the concept often gets tied into the nature of ultimate reality itself.
Yes, take the concept of satya in some Indian traditions.
Yeah.
It means truth, but it's often tied to ultimate reality or being, which is called sat. So to speak satya isn't just to speak facts, it's to speak in a way that aligns with the fundamental reality of the entire universe.
You're right about the mystical path.
The mystical path, which is common across Buddhism, Hinduism, Sufism, it often talks about seeing things as they really are. And that requires stripping away all the illusion, all the ego, all the cultural conditioning.
So this implies that if you're morally flawed or if your ego is too strong, your actual capacity to recognize or to live in truth is impaired.
It connects your moral development directly to your epistemology, your theory of how you know things. The whole goal shifts away from defining the perfect correspondence mechanism to asking this profound moral and existential question. How do I live in truth?
And that framework suggests that the ability to recognize profound truths requires personal transformation, not just intellectual horsepower.
It's an internal test of your character and your consistency. It's like a very severe, high-stakes coherence check on your entire existence.
That really reframes the whole discussion.
Yeah.
If the ability to know what's true relies on having the courage to face inconvenient realities about ourselves, then the pursuit of truth is inherently a moral act.
It forces us to ask a really tough question. Is my desire for comfort or for social belonging stronger than my desire for what is real?
This philosophical architecture we've built, correspondence, coherence, pragmatism, minimalism, and this spiritual approach, it gives us some incredible intellectual power.
It does.
But now we have to bring these high-level ideas down to the 21st century battlefield, where the challenge to truth is. Well, it's intense, it's immediate, and it's often incredibly manipulative.
This is where the theory has to meet the road, and where the sources we looked at become, frankly, alarmingly relevant. In the past, philosophers could sit and debate the nature of truth.
And now,
Today, our shared sense of reality is being challenged by active external forces in our information ecosystem.
yeah, the sources really highlight this toxic mix of propaganda, fake news, deepfakes, and these hyper-coherent conspiracy theories. This isn't just intellectual confusion anymore, it's active sabotage of our ability to find any common ground.
And what's so dangerous is that misinformation cleverly leverages our natural philosophical tendencies.
How do you mean?
Well, think about deepfakes. They directly attack our ability to trust correspondence. If seeing is no longer believing, how can we correspond our visual perception to objective reality?
That's a huge problem.
And then you have filter bubbles, fed by algorithms, which reinforce these highly localized but ultimately untrue coherent systems.
That is a crucial insight. Our social media echo chambers are the perfect environment for that dangerous version of coherence theory to just run wild.
They are. Everything you see confirms the existing narrative, which makes the whole system feel so strong and validated, even if it completely contradicts verifiable external facts.
The system is closed, it's self-reinforcing.
And it's highly resilient to any outside evidence. And this environment forces us to ask these practical questions every single hour of the day. How do we actually assess the reliability of a claim when our sense of correspondence is compromised and the coherence is being manipulated? Who do we decide to trust?
The answer can't be to just give up. We can't have philosophical abstinence. We have to use active methods.
We do. The fundamental answer is evidence-based thinking, but we have to acknowledge that that requires work. It requires labor. In the current age, seeking truth demands critical thinking skills that frankly weren't as necessary even 20 years ago.
So what does that look like in practice?
You have to actively cross-reference. You have to seek out contradictory sources. You have to practice what librarians call lateral reading, checking a source's reputation while you're reading their claim, not after you've already bought into it.
And it requires cultivating certain intellectual virtues, doesn't it? Honesty, humility, the courage to admit you were wrong.
Those are practical tools against manufactured chaos. If you are unwilling to change your mind, you are actively choosing comfort over truth, and that choice makes you incredibly vulnerable to manipulation.
Because if we only cling to beliefs that make us feel good,
We are failing the pragmatic test, because the long-term consequence of holding on to false beliefs is always, eventually, personal or social erosion. Hashtag beta there. The domains and their tools, Learner's Toolbox.
okay, let's break down the toolbox across specific fields. Because if no single theory of truth is perfect for every type of claim, then different domains must have developed their own customized, robust tools to verify claims and build confidence.
Yes, this is about seeing how those philosophical theories are operationalized, how they're turned into concrete methodologies.
Let's start with science again, but go a bit deeper into its methodology. Science aims for correspondence, but it has to acknowledge that perspective problem we talked about earlier.
Right, so science operationalizes its pursuit of truth through the scientific method. Observation, rigorous experimentation, the ability to make predictions, and that social process of peer review. But the absolute key mechanism for building confidence, for moving from a hypothesis to a theory, is replication.
Why is replication so crucial?
Because it's the best tool we have to address the perspective problem. If a finding is truly objective, it has to be replicable by different scientists in different labs using independent methods.
So if only one lab can get a result?
The scientific community treats that result with extreme skepticism. They recognize the potential for experimental error or fraud or just cultural bias in that one setting. Science never claims to have absolute eternal certainty. It achieves probabilistic certainty, meaning we are highly confident that this is true, but we're always ready to falsify it if new, stronger evidence comes along.
That's a fundamentally pragmatic and humble approach to correspondence. Okay, now let's move to history. History can't use replication. You only get one shot at the past.
History uses a different synthesis of the theories. It relies on analyzing primary documents, secondary sources, artifacts, testimony. The historian's main task is to seek coherence across multiple, often contradictory sources.
Okay.
A historical claim is judged to be true if it's the most coherent, the most plausible narrative that can account for all the available evidence while minimizing contradictions.
So when historians are debating, say, the specific causes of the fall of the Roman Empire, they're looking at all this fragmented, contradictory evidence, and they're asking, which story, which narrative coheres best into a credible explanation for all the known facts?
Exactly. They are trying to build the most robust internal web of belief, hoping that it corresponds to the reality of the past. If one theory requires you to just dismiss three major primary sources, well, its coherence is weakened and it loses credibility.
Let's contrast that with math and pure logic. They don't rely on external observation or fragmented evidence.
Not at all. They rely on deductive certainty. A mathematical theorem or a logical conclusion is proven true using a formal proof. If the steps follow logically from a set of established axioms, the initial accepted rules, then the conclusion is guaranteed to be true.
That sounds like the highest level of certainty you can get.
It is. It's an intensely coherent system where truth is guaranteed by the structure itself, regardless of physical observation, but it only applies to these abstract, closed systems.
And finally, religion and spirituality. What tools do they use to verify claims since they operate on that plane of existential truth?
Here, the verification is really multifaceted and often very internal. The tools include scripture and tradition, human reason, which is logic and coherence, individual experience, like mystical visions or personal transformation.
And the outcome.
And the pragmatic outcome, yes. Does this belief system lead to a life of virtue and meaning? A claim is often considered true if it aligns with the sacred texts, is supported by the tradition, and is validated by the internal experience of the believer and the community over generations.
So what's the ultimate takeaway here for the listener? How do we use this synthesis of tools?
The takeaway is that absolute certainty is rare, and it's probably only found in math. In the complex world of human affairs, we achieve strong, well-supported confidence by demanding that a claim pass multiple tests.
Correspondence, coherence, and pragmatism.
Does it correspond to experience? Is it internally consistent? Does it reliably help us predict or solve problems? If a single claim or a source fails one of these key tests, we should treat it with immediate suspicion. ###C. Relativism, humility, and shared reality.
This whole discussion about truth so often gets derailed by that common phrase you hear everywhere. There is no objective truth. Everyone has their own truth. We have to address relativism head-on because it really is the default philosophical stance for a lot of people today.
This is maybe the most crucial part of applying this whole toolbox. We have to distinguish between two radically different things that people mean when they invoke relativism.
Okay, what's the first one? The valuable, healthy form.
That's what we could call intellectual humility. It acts as a necessary warning against arrogance. It's the voice that says, be careful. Your perspective is limited and partial. It's influenced by your culture, your history, your position in society.
So if you're a wealthy man discussing poverty, your truth is partial.
Exactly. Or if you're from one culture discussing the practices of another, your perspective is incomplete. This healthy relativism is a moral check that demands we listen to others and synthesize different experiences to form a less biased correspondence to reality.
So it's about acknowledging the limits of our access to truth, not denying that truth exists.
That's the key distinction. It's the foundation for productive dialogue. But then there's the other version.
The problematic denial version.
Yes, what we can call problematic relativism. This is the version that asserts nothing is truly true or false. There are only equally valid opinions. And this version is incredibly dangerous because it collapses the crucial distinction between evidence and assertion, between fact and fantasy. It elevates subjective feeling to the level of objective fact.
Let's illustrate the stakes of that denial. If we're discussing whether or not a vaccine works, the intellectual humility version says,
It says, my access to the full data set is limited, and I should really seek out peer-reviewed studies.
Right. And the problematic relativism version says,
It says, my gut feeling that vaccines don't work is just as true as the decades of scientific correspondence and pragmatic evidence.
and that's why it's so dangerous. If you take that to its extreme, it makes meaningful policy or moral judgment or even a shared reality completely impossible.
It does. If there is no objective reality, independent of our wishes, then saying it's wrong for a government to suppress the vote gets reduced entirely to, well, I personally disapprove of that.
Yeah.
There's no shared foundation based on objective human rights or observable political realities.
It just transforms public life into pure power dynamics. Because if no one can claim that one statement is objectively truer than another, then the only thing left is who can shout the loudest or who holds the most authority.
The shared reality just vanishes, and social cohesion breaks down.
Yeah.
We have to take truth seriously, the idea that something is real regardless of our feelings about it. But we have to simultaneously hold this deep humility about the limits and the cultural influences on our access to that reality,
Strive for correspondence, demand pragmatic success.
while always recognizing that our map is partial. This is what you could call epistemic responsibility.
This has been a really expansive journey. We've mapped the territory with correspondence, we've checked the map's internal structure with coherence, tested its utility with pragmatism, understood its linguistic function with minimalism, and then acknowledged its existential demands in the spiritual view.
And if we synthesize all of those approaches, I think we arrive at a pretty sobering conclusion. The deepest question about truth is no longer theoretical. The question is behavioral.
How we behave in relation to truth.
Exactly. Do we genuinely care if our beliefs are true? Or are we satisfied if they're just comfortable or socially advantageous, or if they're useful for validating the social group we belong to?
Comfort is the primary enemy of truth.
Especially now, in the modern age, where algorithms are literally designed to maximize our comfort.
It's infinitely easier to believe something that validates your identity than it is to undertake that courageous act of changing your mind.
And that is the second moral challenge. Are we willing to exhibit the courage and the humility that's required to change our minds when the evidence demands it? That willingness to sacrifice a cherished belief for a difficult, inconvenient truth. That is perhaps the highest ethical test we face in the information age.
If reality is a hammer and your belief is a precious glass house, are you willing to let that hammer fall?
That's a great way to put it. And the final moral challenge is this. Are we using truth to build understanding, or are we just using it as a weapon to dominate other people?
How so?
Truth has to be a unifying force. It should help us establish shared ground, shared facts, shared moral principles that correspond to human experience. When truth claims are used manipulatively or to enforce rigid, unquestioning adherence to a single ideology, that's often a sign that coherence has gone too far and correspondence has been abandoned completely.
So the pursuit of truth, when it's done correctly, demands openness, curiosity, and a kind of intellectual generosity.
It does, and that brings us right back to the roots of philosophy itself.
The love of wisdom.
Exactly. The love of truth is synonymous with the love of wisdom, which is the literal meaning of philosophia. It's foundational to living a responsible, examined life.
We hope we've given you a comprehensive toolkit today, the fact checker, which is correspondence, the internal proofreader, coherence, the outcome tester, pragmatism, the linguist, minimalism, and the existential guide of spiritual truth. You now have the intellectual scaffolding to analyze pretty much any claim you encounter.
That is the hope. And remember, truth is not a destination, it's a discipline. It is both a profound philosophical puzzle and a demanding moral challenge.
So you have one final thought for us to mull over.
I do. So here's the thought for you to take with you as you navigate your week. Which of your beliefs is the most comfortable one you hold right now? Can you commit yourself to seeking what is real, even when finding that reality requires you to tear down a highly comfortable, highly coherent belief structure that you may have spent years building? The true cost of truth is often the loss of comfort and the labor of transformation.